Hello and welcome to another day in the Milky Way. And tonight we're going to bring you another uh, chapter of Young Wild West, Prince of the Saddle. And tonight, of course, we got things going on. And I want to say hello to everybody who's watching this. And so we are going to let's see here. Follow these steps. Some screens let you share audio files. Okay, I'm going to share this. So, anyway, I'm hoping you guys are all doing good, and I am trying to do my best to figure this out. And of course, how I did this wrong. How did I do this? Not right. Share system audio. Yes. Share. Okay, there we go. Got it. Wow, look at that, boys and girls. That's how you do it wrong. Yeah. Anyway, let's try this. I'm trying to move this to this, and then we shall go like that. That will be a much better plan of attack. And as always, I'm going to bring you one of the best and only times where we actually play stuff and do things, and I will mispronounce words like you won't believe. So let's bring it on. Bring it on for another night of Young Wild West as we continue on with Chapter 8. As Wild West defeats Buck Wood. As you remember, in the last episode, we were dealing with, and he was riding a horse, and Buck Wood was trying to, at the best, give him a run for his money because he said the Young Wild West was just not good enough. Well, the young boy is standing up to him, and he's going to ride that wild horse, and we're going to see what Buck Wood does about that. So let's show music, and we shall continue from there. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. That's about as good as I'm going to make it. There we go. And yeah, that'll Young Wild West. There we go. And you don't need to see my ugly mug. So we're going to stop sharing, and we are going to go right. Oh, no, I need to share. That's what I need to do. Sorry about the confusion, because that's what I do the best, is be confused. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go like that. And that will solve my whole problem. You don't need to see my ugly mug. Anyway, okay, let's get right to it. We don't want to waste any time. Chapter 8, Wild defeats Buckwood. Young Wild West went straight to the place where he had rigged a sort of stable for his horse. The handsome animal appeared to be perfectly contented, though he did not like anyone else to come near him. He picked up his ears and gave a whinny as the boy approached, and was crest in return. Old feller, I want you to behave yourself fine for a little while. I'm going to teach a big buff of a man a lesson. It was not possible for Spitfire to understand, but he seemed to just the same, for he gave another whinny and rubbed the boy's shoulder with his nose. Wild saddled and bridled him without the least difficulty. It seemed as though the horse had never been a wild one. A few minutes later, he rode out into the single road or street of the village and made for the supply store. A large crowd that had collected by this time, and everyone was on tiptoe of excitement. A cheer greeted the appearance of young Wild West as the sorrel cantered up and came to a halt with an arched neck and a flowing mane. Buck Wood appeared a moment later. He was mounted on a rather fine specimen of a horse, or horseflesh, and in spite of his somewhat ungainly figure, he made a good appearance in the saddle. Just about 4 men gave him a cheer as he rode up, and he took off his broad sombrero and waved it cowboy fashion. "Who's going to be the judge of this here business?" he demanded. looking around with a fierce of expression as he could possibly put on. This was done for the benefit of Wild alone. It could not possibly have any effect on anyone who knew him. Won't that stakeholder do? Retorted Wild. Well, there ought to be there 3 judges. All right, I'll name Cheyenne Charlie for one. Now you name the other. That gives you their naming of 2 and me only 1. Oh, have it any way you like. Name them all if you want to. They shamed the man somewhat, and after a little talk, it was decided that Smith, the stakeholder, Cheyenne Charlie, and Andrews were to act. The place on the prairie where the sorrel had been broken was selected for the match, and the crowd followed two principals to it. Now then, observed Buck, their first thing we'd better do is to ride a race straight ahead. Their speed of their horses are not to count, but their man sits in the saddle and manages their horse. All right, answered Wild West. The judges will pleasantly tell us how far to go before we return and come back. This was quickly settled upon, and the 2 horses drew up alongside each other. Spitfire was spirited that Wild could not stop him from dancing, but he got him quiet enough to make the start. 1, 2, 3, go! Explained Smith. And there they were, off. Young Wild West found that he could easily outdistance any other horse, but he could not want to, as the judges were to pass on the style in which they rode. Wild answered to everyone, move of the steed under him, and back came close to doing the same, but not quite. He had never seen the boy ride before, and he knew he was defeated in the first trial before the turn was made. But he did his best coming back and said nothing when the race was decided in favor of Wild, but a vote of 2-1. Andrews, of course, voted that Buck did the best, but that was to be expected of him, so no one seemed at all surprised. You can bet me that maybe. But now I'll show you something that you can't do, exclaimed the bully. Who's got a nose rag in the crowd? Smith at once produced a handkerchief and handed it to him. Remember, said Buck, looking to the judges, he's got to do this trick to even with me, and to beat me on it, he's got to go me 1 better. All right, was the reply. Go ahead. Without any further remarks, he rode out a couple of 100 yards and dropped the handkerchief on the ground. Then he came back and, wheeling his horse around, started him up at full speed for it. He neared it suddenly, stooping and picked it up with his left hand, and wheeling his horse, came galloping back with the handkerchief in his hand. In those days, that was considered a great feat by a cowboy and bordermen, and there were but few who could do it. Buck received quite a response and applause, and then it came young Wild West's turn. The boy did not appear to be the least bit concerned over what he had done, and noticing his friends, felt satisfied that he could do the trick all right. Wild placed the handkerchief in about the same spot, and then came back, made a dash for it, and picked it up with the greatest of ease. How was that? Asked Cheyenne Charlie, turning to the 2 judges. That was done neat enough, wasn't it? I should say it was, replied Smith, while Andrews said not a word. But young Wild West was not done with that particular trick yet. He produced another handkerchief, and taking both of them with him, galloped out again. He dropped them on the ground about 30 feet apart, and when he came to a halt, he was in a straight line with them. The men did not know exactly what he was doing, but Buck Wood shrugged his shoulders uneasily. The next minute, Wild came riding toward the handkerchiefs at a breakneck speed. It seemed that his horse was going right over them, but as he neared the first one, he swerved the sorrel to the right, and stooping down, picked it up. Then, as quick as a flash from a gun, the sorrel turned the other way, and he grabbed the other handkerchief. If you can do that, Mr. Buckwood, you will surprise The observed all of us observed Wild as he rode back to the group with a prolonged cheer ringing in his ears. Huh, explained the bully in a voice of scorn. I reckon I can do that easy enough. I've done it more than 1,000 times. Now, young Wild West had never seen anyone do it but himself, and he doubted very much that Buck had seen it done before, let alone doing it himself. And he was right. Buck had never attempted the feat before, but he felt that he could do it now, so he put on a bold front over it. He was just a little nervous when he rode out to drop the handkerchiefs, though. He did not know exactly how far apart to place them, but he placed them the best he knew how, and then he got ready to do the trick. The crowd watched him with interest, for nearly all of the men, though it was just possible that he could pick up the two as he had picked up the one. But they did not stop to consider how difficult it was to change position so quickly, both in the horse and the rider. But when Buck got ready, he started his horse at the top of its speed straight for the handkerchiefs. He stooped for the first one and missed it, and then he made an effort to get the other. He had passed it by a dozen feet. Instead of a cheer, a laugh went up, and the men, this time Buck Wood, was very mad. He wanted another chance, and there was no such arrangements in the terms of the contest. The judges did not know about giving him another chance at the same thing. Oh yes, give him 3 chances, said young Wild West. He couldn't do it if he had a dozen trails through him. I'll show you this time, he bellowed out, and this time he placed the handkerchiefs further apart. Everyone in the crowd noticed that they were twice as far apart as they had been when Wild performed his feat. It would be much easier to do in this way, but no one said anything, and they wanted to see if Buck could do it anyway. He soon got ready and headed toward the two handkerchiefs. He came in a dash. He managed to pick up the first handkerchief this time, but made a miserable miss on the second. You can do it, yelled out someone in the crowd, and if you could twist yourself all about out of shape and never get it straight again. That brought out a laugh, and the big bully began to grow mad. I ain't bait out yet, he cried. There's one more thing I want to try before we get her through, and if I win that, I think I ought to have another chance at them handkerchiefs. You can have another show now, called out young Wild West. No, I'll wait. I don't beat you in this next trick, I won't ask for it. The judges said all right, and the bully, now somewhat cool again, made preparations for the wonderful feat of horsemanship he was going to perform. He had come prepared for it. The riding up to Andrews, he asked him for the package he had carried over for him. Young Wild West had no idea what the feat was going to be, and came up close to see what the package contained. When it was open, a laugh went up from the men. Potatoes, exclaimed Rubedy. What is he going to do? Cook dinner for us? I think not, retorted Wild. I have an idea. He is going to shoot at the potatoes as they are thrown up in the air for him. Ah, you just got a right idea, said Buck. Did you ever try your hand at it? Oh, I believe I have a few times. The bully contested lengthened again. And what don't their boy know? He asked himself. Go ahead and show me what you're going to do, said Wild. All right. You just take 6 of those potatoes and ride alongside of me and throw 'em up as fast as I tell you, and I'll show you how I can shoot while in their saddle. I'll just show you, say, Mr. Buckwood. Hand over the vegetables. Buck counted out 6 of the largest potatoes and gave them to Wild. Now, when the judges say go, we'll start. And the bully, every time I say now, you just let that potato go up in the air about 20 feet ahead of me. I think I understand the thing thoroughly, was the calm reply. I'm ready. Presently, the only 1, 2, 3, go came from the judges, and away they darted. At the first call, young Wild West threw the potatoes just where he wanted it, and Buck split it as nicely as you please with a shot from his revolver. The next one was he missed, though it was no fault manner in which it was thrown. The third and fourth were missed also, but the fifth and sixth were hit. That was pretty good shooting, and there was no one who witnessed it that said it wasn't. Riding at full speed on horseback and shooting such a small object as potatoes as they were thrown into the air was no small thing to do. And with a revolver, too. It might be quite as easy thing to do with a shotgun. But Buck had practiced more than a year ago to do that thing, but he seldom hit more than half of what he shot at. But that was good enough for that kind of shooting. He thought he surely had his opponent on this, and so did a great many of the men in the crowd. But young Wild West did not appear to be disturbed at the least. He come up smiling when it was his turn, and though he took particular note that the potatoes Buck picked out were somewhat smaller than the others, he said nothing. "Are you ready?" asked the judges. "Yes," answered Wild. The signal was given, and off they went. The first potato Buck threw too far out of the way, and Wild did not shoot at it. He cast a look at the man which meant more than words could say, and the result was that the next one went up the right style. Crack! The vegetable flew into pieces. Young Wild West had hit the first he shot at. He gave the word for the third to go up. It went and through, and it not thrown exactly as it should have been, he hit it. "That's two for their prince of the saddle," yelled out Jack Ruby for the crowd. The fourth potato Wild did not shoot at. "No more of that," he said to Buck. "You throw them right. Do you hear?" The bully scowled fiercely, but made no reply. However, the fifth potato went upright, and Wild cut it in two. 3, 2, 3, and one more shot for Wild West, sang out some of the one in the crowd. "Yes, and he ain't getting a square show either," said another. "We'll see about that when the judges decide," observed Cheyenne Charlie. Wild now urged his horse forward at a faster gait and called Buck to keep up with him. "Let that last potato go," he exclaimed a moment later. The bully did let it go, throwing it much higher than he had any of the others before. Though he was not aware of it, this was just what Wild wanted him to do. Then it was that a simultaneous gasp of astonishment came from the men in the crowd. Young Wild West did not shoot at the potato from his regular position in the saddle. He swung himself downward, similar to the way he had done when he picked up the handkerchief, and then the potato was descending on the other side of the horse. He shot from beneath the animal's belly and split it into 100 pieces. The remarkable feat nearly took Buck Wood's breath away. He knew he had been beaten, very badly beaten, but he was not man enough to ride up to his conqueror and shake his hand with him. He was not made of that sort of stuff. Instead of this, he rode off for the village, using some hard cuss words as he did so. Every man in the crowd congratulated Wild, even to Andrews. Some riding and shooting they had never seen before, and they wanted to shake hands with the one who could do it. Smith handed the $200 over to the winner, and he put it in his pocket. "I made that 200 pretty easy," remarked Wild. "I wouldn't mind doing the same thing every day." And anyone, as says, young Wild West ain't the prince of the saddle, is a liar, yelled Cheyenne Charlie, who was so elated as a result of the contest that he could scarcely contain himself. If anyone had contradicted his statement just then, the services of the gravedigger would have been required very soon. But no one was willing to contradict him, although Andrews and Buck's other pals felt pretty sore over the defeat of their idol. When Wild turned around, he found that a great many more had witnessed the exhibition than those who had come out of the prairie at the start. The command and the officers of the fort were sitting close by on horseback, and not far away were 3 or 4 ladies, of one whom was Miss Arita Murdoch. "Oh, Wild!" she exclaimed, when he rode up to her and received her congratulations. "You don't know how good it made me feel to see you beat that man at his own games." "Well, Arita, it makes me feel good, too, and besides, I am just $100 richer." "So you will keep the $100 you won from him, then?" "Certainly. Why not?" "Oh, I heard someone remark just now that you would most likely give it back to him." "Well, little one, whoever thinks that way is very much mistaken. I won the money fair and square, and I consider it mine just as much as though I had been hired to give him an expedition by someone. I was not betting on a sure thing, so I was taking no advantage whatsoever." "Oh, if you say it, all right. I am sure it is, Wild. That it is. Now, if you hear anybody else say that I ought to give that money back to Buckwood, just tell him that it was he who issued the challenge and that you think I won fair." "I will, Wild." The two rode back to the village together. Just as they entered it, Buckwood rode past them and made a remark that was not complimentary to either Wild or his fair companion. Instantly the hero's blood was aroused. Quick as a flash, he urged Spitfire forward, and seizing the big cur by the shoulder, he pulled him from the saddle. He had dismounted by this time. Buck was squarely on his feet, and facing him, he exclaimed, "You got to apologize for that remark you made, or else taking a thrashing." All right, what do we got now? We are on chapter 9. Let's see. Let's go with this chapter. Okay, the ride to Fort McDonald. If the big cowboy had been surprised at the boy defeating him at his own tricks, he was more so now. To think that he would dare to challenge him in a fight was more than Buck could understand. He was at least a head taller than young Wild West, and he was known to be almost as powerful as an ox. "Why, what?" he grasped. "You thrash me?" "Yes, that was a cool rejoinder. If you don't apologize for that remark you just made now, I will surely thrash you." The bully had all along been itching to teach that boy what he termed a lesson, and the only thing that kept him from attacking him at the presence of Cheyenne Charlie. But the man was not in sight just now, and that is reason he had insulted Wild as he rode by. He did not expect the boy would dare to resent it, and he meant to ride back, and slap the young fellow in the face. And now the boy was going to thrash him. Buck drew a long breath and burst into laughs. "So, if I don't apologize, you're going to lick me, eh?" "Yes, and if you attempt to use a weapon in the skirmish, I'll kill you. Just bear that in mind before I start in. See here, youngster," and he made a grab to get Wild by the collar. "I'll just what?" he meant to say. Will never be known, for that at that instant young Wild West caught him in the mouth, and he staggered back as though he had been kicked by a government mule. "Rip roaring snakes!" yelled that now thoroughly enraged bully. "I'll break every bone in your body for hitting me like that when I wasn't looking." Bump! Spat! Wild caught him in a hard one, just above his belt, and with his left, and then landed a right swing on his face. Down he went with a confused heap. He struggled wildly to get up upon his feet, but failing, fell forward on his stomach and remained perfectly quiet. A number of men came running just then, and they began whooping and shouting, almost bursting with merriment in the downfall of Buck. "Get up and fight like a man," one shouted. "Don't go to sleep," cried another. You ought to whip that whole regiment of boys. You're big enough. Come on, get her up. These are the whole lot more similar sayings rang out, and in about 15 seconds Buck got up. He was a little dazed and mad as a hornet. He made a rush as though to annihilate Wild on the spot, but the agile young scout stepped aside and putting his foot out tripped him and sent him to the ground again. The burst of laughter that went up was almost defeating. Young Wild West, as cool as thought he was watching a company of soldiers at the drill, waited for him to get up and get his balance. Then he sailed in and knocked him down again with a straight right in the jaw. Few persons knew anything about the art of boxing in those days, but Wild was one of the few. He had lived part of his life in a hustling city and learned it from the street boys there. There was not a man in Fort Bridger that could defeat him at the standoff fight, and those who witnessed the remarkable bout were ready to admit this. I've got enough, brawled the bully as he went down the last time. Let me alone, will ya? Are you going to apologize for what you said? Demanded Wild. Yes. I'll never say anything like that again. All right, get up then, and mind that you keep your word. Buck got up, taking his horse from the man who had caught him and stood holding him. He walked away from the spot. He did not have the strength to get the saddle, and his eyes were rapidly closing from the effects of the blows he had received in the face. And he had not even touched young Wild West during the entire skirmish. This made the boy more popular than ever with his many friends. Mounting Spitfire, who was being held by Rita a few yards off, Wild rode his for the shanty the girl was stopping at with her at his side. I could not help wait to see you thrash that man, she said, though I was afraid you couldn't do it. It was easy enough, wasn't it? He laughed. I'm not afraid of such men as he. It does not take me many minutes to form an impression of a person, and I knew what he was the moment I first saw him. But don't you think he will try and get revenge for what you have done to him today? If he does, he'll get the worst of it, or my name is not Young Wild West. I wish you could be careful, though, for my sake. I will, Rita. For your sake, don't worry about me. Getting hurt by such men as Buckwood, they are too cowardly to do anything, but I will keep an eye on him just the same. Late that afternoon, Cheyenne Charlie sought out young Wild West and said, I was sorry I missed the fight. I had known it was going to take place. I would have followed you in from the prairie, but was invited to join in a game of cards, and a lieutenant and a corporal, and I could not resist the temptation. Well, it wasn't much of a fight. I had no trouble in giving him more than he wanted. He don't know the least thing about the art of self-defense as far as the use of nature's weapons are concerned. Well, I must say that I don't myself. I've always done my fighting with a gun or a knife or a hunting knife. Is that so? Well, I have done a little of that kind too. You see, I have been compelled to fight my own way ever since my foster father died, and I've come in contact with all kinds of people and all kinds of fighting. How do you know? Make out in your game of cards. Oh, I lost about $30. I didn't have any luck today. So, you were playing for money, then? Oh, yes. There wouldn't be any fun unless you played for money. And the soldiers won your money? Yes, about $30 in gold. But I'll get it back again. I don't believe in playing draw poker, and I never have, only when it has been necessary. Necessary? What do you mean by that? Well, why, when you're trying to find out something about a man and only way to get out his confident terms with him is to sit in a game with him. That's what I mean. I have been through that sort of thing, you know. And how did you make out when you played? Oh, I never lost anything. Cheyenne Charlie looked admirably at the young friend. It seems to me that you are up to snuff on about everything that's going, he observed. But I want to tell you what I come to see you about. Their boss at the fort asked me if I wouldn't get you to go out on a little scout tonight. He seems to be a little worried about the Sioux. Heard bad news about him, I guess? Go with you. Certainly I will. I am glad of the chance. Well, well, strike out at sundown then. Be ready and I'll come get for you. Only you and I are going? Yes, that's enough. All right, I'll be ready. The sun was just sinking and West went with Cheyenne Charlie and came around. Young Wild West was ready for him and he quickly mounted Spitfire. And the two rode off in the direction of the forts. They had got an idea up there at the fort that the Indians will come around and finish up their settlement tonight, said the scout as they rode along. Don't they know that the people have left the place? Taintly likely they do. They're warming up to give 'em. That other night has kindred kept 'em away, I guess, and they think their settlers are still at the forks. Is that all you've got to do is go down and see if the Sioux show up? Oh no, I've got a message to take over to General Brooks at Fort McDonald, which is about 50 miles from here. And this here job ain't going to take us 2 days and a night, providing we don't get nabbed by the Sioux. We'll just run the risk. That's right. If I can't get to Fort McDonald, I don't think anyone else can. I wish you had told me about that we were going to go away for so long, said Wild after a pause. Why? Well, you see, I told someone that I'd be back by morning. That is just their reason I didn't tell her. I thought you wouldn't go if I said I was going to take so long to make the trip. Never mind, Wild. Their gal can wait an extra day to see her. She'll hear where we are going before an hour has passed, and then she won't expect you back as soon. Young Wild West changed the subject. The scout had hit him in a tender spot, for Rita was really the person he oughted to. The stars were shining brightly, and there was a new moon, so they could see over the vast scope of the prairie pretty well as they cantered along. When they were within a mile of the settlement at the forks, they came to a halt and listened for a few minutes. Presently, they heard a call from the whippoorwill in the distance. Cheyenne Charlie nudged Wild. Did you hear that? He asked. Yes, was the reply. That call was not made by a bird. No, it was made by a redskin. They're close at hand, and they're sneaking up under the cover of the tall grass. They surely don't know that the settlers have deserted the place. No, they don't know it. Well, what shall we do? We'll wait here and see if they get fooled, and then we'll put a few shots in them, then ride off to the east for Fort McDonald. A good idea. 5 minutes later, there were more calls similar to the notes of the whippoorwill, and then all was silent as a grave. It puzzles them because there ain't no lights to be seen, and the cabins, said Charlie. There are only two conclusions for them to draw. What are they? Well, the settlers have deserted the place, or else they are aware that they're being attacked and is being made and lying low under the cover of darkness, so the Indians will have no light to direct their shooting at. That's it, I guess. Ah, there they go. Sure enough, the heads and shoulders of the band of fully 100 Sioux suddenly appeared above the tall grass, and with a war whoop they dashed toward the deserted cluster of cabins. Our two friends could dimly see outlines in the distance. Urging their horses forward, they started in pursuit. The Indians were on foot, having left their horses in some hiding place farther back. 2 minutes later, they opened fire on the settlement, and the moment they did, young Wild West and Cheyenne Charlie began shooting at them from the rear. Let 'em have it, exclaimed the latter. As soon as we empty our shooting irons, we'll make a break and try and find their horses so we can stampede them. That'll put them out for sort of a while. When they had emptied their rifles and revolvers, the two uh, daring riders turned and rode for the point that they believed the Indians' horses would be. It was for the lower end of the timber strip that they rode, and they were not disappointed when they got there. Half a dozen Indian boys were in charge of the animals, but they fled in the instant they saw the two whites approach. And then there was easy enough to stampede the animals. In less than 5 minutes, they had all the mustangs and ponies running in all directions all over the prairie. Now we will go about our business, said young Wild West. And so they did, and long before they got out of the hearing of the Sioux warriors had discovered how they had been fooled, and they were doing their best to catch their horses. Our two friends were not afraid of being pursued by the band, but they didn't know they'd have to be out on the lookout for others, as the woods were full of them. To use the expression, luck was with them. It seemed for about 9 o'clock the next morning that they had reached Fort McDonald after taking it pretty easy all the way. The message, which was an important one, was delivered to General Brooks, and the two scouts were commended for their excellent work. In order to give their horses a rest, they must wait till sundown before starting back on the backtrack. But during the day, the startling things took place. Old Sitting Bull himself had taken charge of the allied tribes in the Indian War, which, though not very long at one time, was declared. Young Wild West and Cheyenne Charlie cautioned, nay, almost commanded not to go back to Fort Bridger. The Indians were said to be as thick as fleas on a section that they would have to pass through. But Wild was anxious to get back, and Charlie agreed to make an attempt with him. So at sundown they started out, and more than one man at the fort remarked that it was not possible for them to run the gauntlet and reach Bridger alive. A troop of cavalry had been started that afternoon to protect the settlement just north of the route to Bridger, and our two daring friends argued that they ought to pass the worst of the Indian horde by taking a route a little to the south of this. All right, and here we go. I hope you enjoyed that. We will be back next time with Chapter 10, What Buck Would Give. And thank you all for joining me tonight as we continue the Wild West, young Wild West and his adventures. And we will continue on next week. But wasn't that crazy how he had that fist fight with Buck Wood? Yeah, all those bullies. You just stand up to a bully, and guess what? They're not as tough as they seem to be. And that's just the way it goes. Huh. Go figure. Anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope you've enjoyed this series of Young Wild West, Prince of the Saddle. I know we're doing a few of these here and there, and it's been a blast for me. I really enjoy these stories myself, and it's nice to read them to you, more or less to myself, because after that, I just read it. And if you want, I will send you a copy of the PDF of this. I have plenty of them. I'll send you a few. So just let me know. Send me an email. Link is in the description below. Give me a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm. Leave me a comment in the comment sections. And thank you all for coming and being in the chat and everything like that. So I appreciate it. Don't you worry. It's a great day in the neighborhood. And with that, I want to say thank you. And remember to always be the frequency you want to receive. Peace, everybody.